Discuss this and all the latest developments in the Israel-US war on Iran. I'm now joined by Mohamad Elmasry, who's professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. And in Singapore, we have Samir Puri, who's a visiting lecturer in war studies at King's College London. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me. Let me start with you, Mohamad Elmasry, and what President Trump has been saying, the President of the United States saying the war could end in 2 to 3 weeks, regardless of whether there is a deal with Iran. How do you interpret this mix of urgency, ending the war in 2 to 3 weeks, and also the indifference now, it would seem, towards reaching a deal?
Well, I think there's an increasing realization in Washington that the objectives that were laid out aren't going to be met. There isn't going to be regime change. Now the U.S. is shifting kind of some of the aims. They're talking about the Strait of Hormuz, forcing that open. Mm-hmm. And obviously that was open before this war started.
Do you think this signals that there's a recognition from Washington that Iran will not agree to the full set of demands, the 15 demands that they...
Well, yeah, that's what I was coming to. So there's an acknowledgement that there isn't going to be regime change. There's an acknowledgement that the Iranians are going to continue to exert control over the Strait of Hormuz. And there's an acknowledgement that there isn't going to be a negotiated deal. Trump said last night that a deal is not even necessary for the U.S. to achieve its aims. What's worrying is when he talks about bombing Iran into the Stone Ages, and that's something that obviously Israel already has an interest in doing in Iran, in Lebanon, in Gaza. That's kind of the Israeli military MO. So it's going to be perhaps a very dangerous 2 or 3 weeks.
Samir Puri, President Trump says, we don't need a deal now to end this war. But at the same time, his defense secretary, his war secretary, Pete Hegseth, has said the U.S. will not rule out boots on the ground. What do you anticipate will be the core message of the president's national address later this Wednesday?
Yeah, and that address is actually a very, very big moment because President Trump is probably going to put some of his cards on the table. I think that's 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today. How I interpret this is that the United States has backed itself into a strategic dead end. It doesn't have a lot of good options. And I think two of the big developments I'd highlight that are probably informing these messages from the U.S. Number one is the desperate U.S. attempt to try to cajole other Western allies to play some sort of role in the Hormuz security undertaking, which would be an undertaking that long postdates the firing when it stops. And the second thing I think is of note is that China and Pakistan have actually got together and put together a 5-point plan on stability for the Gulf and the Middle East region, published yesterday between their foreign ministers. So I think the situation is slipping out of Trump's control to actually dictate. What I think he has left is the ability to deliver great death and destruction from the skies over the next couple of weeks. And I agree with the other guest, the next week or two is an extremely hazardous period of time in terms of the amount of lethal force the U.S. and Israel is likely to use.
I'll ask you, Mohamad Elmasry, about the China and Pakistan diplomatic efforts, the diplomatic efforts on that end in a minute. But Samir, just on the Strait of Hormuz, this is still an important lever for Iran. Could they be a scenario in which Iran allows freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, but imposes fees, transit fees, for example? And could that be considered acceptable by Washington if, as Mohamad says, some of these red lines that the U.S. has set, it's going to have to give some of them up?
No, I think Washington may actually have to live with that situation if that is indeed what transpires, that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and other structures set up this toll system that they verify which country a ship is flagged to allow it permission or not allow it permission. Overall, though, that would be a disastrous outcome for the U.S. And Hegseth, in his press conference yesterday, again used this language that we are fighting this war on, in his words, behalf of the free world. Well, actually, then a lot of U.S. allies might find themselves on the wrong side of this toll system. And then there's an interesting question as to whether, just take a country like Greece, for example, obviously a very big ship-owning nation, would Greece start to look for favorable access for itself?
Mohamad Elmasry, your thoughts about the Strait of Hormuz and also about the Iranians here. we continue to hear from the Iranians, including from the foreign minister in the latest interview he gave to Al Jazeera, that negotiations are not underway. They describe the current context as limited. Is Iran looking for an open-ended war here, or are they also perhaps looking for an exit strategy at some point?
Look, the war has done untold harm to the Iranians. I mean, the Israelis and the Americans are really doing a number, in particular on the civilian infrastructure. They have hit hundreds of hospitals and schools and thousands of residential homes. The Israelis have started in the last couple of weeks to use these 2,000-pound bombs, and they're using them to take out entire city blocks. So it's very destructive. I'm sure the Iranians would love to end this war sooner than later. On the other hand, time does very much play into the hands of the Iranians. Mm-hmm. A longer war works into their favor. Now, in terms of your question about the negotiations, the problem here, as you all have been reporting, is the complete lack of trust. Absolutely. The Trump administration backed out of an agreement, the JCPOA, back in 2018. That was the first kind of betrayal of trust. And then in June of 2025, in the middle of negotiations that had been going very well, according to President Trump himself, the U.S. Bombed Iran in the middle of those negotiations. And then 8 months later, in February of 2026, the same thing happened again. The Almanis were saying that the negotiations were going very well. Mm-hmm. The Iranians had agreed to really incredible concessions that would have worked into the favor of the United States. And at that moment, the Trump administration bombed again. So how do we even get to a negotiated settlement? And I think that's where Trump's statement comes in. He's realizing that there isn't going to be a negotiated settlement.
All right, Samir Puri, I know we wanted to talk a bit more about China and its role here, but perhaps a little later today we can do that. I just wanted to ask you about Lebanon, because we can't lose sight of what's happening in Lebanon, of course. If President Trump follows through with, this idea of ending the war in Iran within 2 to 3 weeks, what are the most likely scenarios for Israel's front in Lebanon, given what we're seeing and hearing from the Israeli defense minister?
A really good question, because there were always two military operations, the US's Epic Fury and Israel's Operation Lion's Roar. There's no guarantee that Israel wouldn't continue to escalate in southern Lebanon, even if the campaign targeted at the Iranian regime in Iran stops. And I think that unevenness to the way in which this war ends is, no one can say anything is definite, but it's very likely. Because Hezbollah in Lebanon has been pummeled, not only in this conflict, but over the last 18 or so months in various different ways that we all know and understand. And I think Netanyahu's own domestic political future now seems to be somewhat tied to sort of perpetual war, and creating the sense that he is steering the country through a series of campaigns that are targeting Israel's mortal enemy. So I would say there's not great prospects for the Israeli campaign in Lebanon to cease, even when the American campaign targeting Iran ceases.
Mohamad Elmasry, your thoughts about Lebanon and the possible scenarios there. Will Israel view a U.S. pullback on Iran as a green light for intensified operations in Lebanon?
I'll be very surprised if the Israelis stop attacking Lebanon whenever the Iran front ends. This is part of Israel's Greater Israel project. It's a major front for them as they pursue the expansion of their borders. That's what they've been doing in Gaza. They're intending clearly to take over a large swath of Gaza, if not all of it, the West Bank, where they've been expanding aggressively, and this area south of the Litani River. They've coveted it for a very long time. They are speaking openly about border expansion and about Greater Israel, and so we should keep our eye on that broader project as Israel continues to try to expand.
Yeah, thank you both for your insights. Mohamad Elmasry, Samir Puri, thank you for joining us on Al Jazeera.